What if everything you ever wanted depended on a language you didn't know? This is a story of Li Wei, a young man with big dreams, a heart full of ambition, and one major obstacle: he couldn't speak English. But when life pushed him into a world where English was the key to success, and maybe even love, he had to make a choice: struggle in silence or fight to find his voice. If you're here, you probably want to improve your English too. Well, you're in the right place. This is not just a story. It's a lesson in learning English through stories. So, sit back, listen carefully, and let's begin. Li Wei was 23 years old when he moved to Shanghai for work. He was smart, hardworking, and full of dreams. He wanted to start his own tech company one day. But there was one problem: he didn't know English. Back in his small town, everyone spoke Mandarin. He never needed English. But now, in this fast-moving city, everything was different. The signs, the business meetings, the investors, everything was in English. The first time Li Wei faced a problem was at a coffee shop. He had come to meet a potential investor, a woman named Emily, who had studied abroad and spoke fluent English. She smiled warmly and said, "Nice to meet you." Li Wei froze. He had practiced this sentence many times in his head, but at that moment, the words just wouldn't come out. His heart raced. He nodded quickly, avoiding her gaze, and managed to whisper, "Nice." Emily seemed to understand his struggle. She switched to slow, clear words. "It's okay. I know learning a new language is hard." Her kindness made him feel even more embarrassed, ashamed, self-conscious. He wanted to impress her, not look weak. He sat through the meeting, mostly silent, feeling small in a world where English was power. His troubles didn't stop there. At work, he struggled to understand emails. His boss asked him to prepare a presentation, but Li Wei didn't know how to write it in English. He felt nervous in meetings, afraid someone would ask him a question. He tried to avoid speaking. People started to think he was shy, but inside, Li Wei felt frustrated, angry, and hopeless. He wanted to speak, to express his ideas, but the words wouldn't come out. One evening, he called his mother. "Ma, I don't think I can do this," he said. "Everyone here speaks English. I don't belong here." His mother listened carefully and said, "Li Wei, when you were a child, did you know how to walk?" Li Wei was confused. "No, Ma." "Then how did you learn?" she asked. "I tried, I fell, and then I got up again." "Exactly," she said. "Learning English is the same. You have to fall, get up, and try again." Li Wei thought about it. Maybe his mother was right. Maybe he was giving up too soon. But deep down, there was another reason pushing him forward. Emily. He wanted to talk to her, to make her laugh, to share his dreams with her. He wanted to impress her not just with his ambition, but with his confidence. The next day, he made a plan. First, he started reading simple English books. He picked up a children's storybook. The sentences were short. The words were easy. He read slowly, checking new words in the dictionary. At first, he could barely understand anything, but he didn't stop. Every day, he read a few pages. Slowly, he started recognizing, identifying, understanding words. Then he moved to listening. He found an English podcast with simple conversations. He played it while eating, while traveling, before sleeping. He didn't understand much, but he kept listening. He focused on how words were pronounced. He tried repeating them. Speaking was the hardest part. He was still scared of making mistakes. One day, he looked in the mirror and said, "Hello, my name is Li Wei." It felt strange, but he kept talking to himself in English. He described his day, his thoughts, his plans. At first, he made mistakes, but no one was there to judge him. This gave him confidence. But learning alone was not enough. He needed to practice with real people. So he did something bold, brave, fearless. He started talking to strangers in English. At the grocery store, he asked, "Where could I find sugar?" Even though he knew where it was, he just wanted to practice. He ordered food in English. He started replying to emails with short sentences. He joined a group where people practiced English together. Every day, he forced himself to speak a little more. Of course, there were bad days too. Sometimes, he forgot words in the middle of a sentence. Sometimes, people corrected him and he felt embarrassed. But he reminded himself, "It's okay. I am learning." One evening, Emily invited him to an event. It was a networking night filled with entrepreneurs and investors. Li Wei knew this was his chance. He had to speak. He had to show them he was more than a silent observer. He practiced his introduction in front of the mirror. At the event, he felt his palms sweat as he approached Emily. "Good evening, Emily," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. She turned surprised. "Li Wei, your English has improved." He smiled. "I practice every day." They talked, slowly at first, but he didn't stop. When an investor asked about his startup idea, Li Wei spoke up. His words weren't perfect, but his passion was clear. People listened. Emily looked at him with admiration. For the first time, he felt like he belonged. Li Wei left the networking event feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: confidence. His English was far from perfect, but he had spoken and people had listened. Most importantly, Emily had noticed. That night, he sat on his bed, replaying the conversations in his mind. For the first time, he truly believed he could do this. The next morning, he woke up with a plan. His startup dream was still alive, but now he knew he had to master English to truly make it work. He increased his efforts. He started watching business talks in English, reading startup case studies, and even writing down his thoughts in a journal. Whenever he found a word he didn't know, he wrote it down and used it in a sentence. Emily noticed a change. They had begun talking more, sometimes over coffee, sometimes through messages. "You're really improving," she told him one day. "You don't just memorize words, you understand them now." Li Wei smiled. "It's because I have a reason to learn." Emily raised an eyebrow. "And what reason is that?" Li Wei hesitated for a moment, then said, "For my dreams and for people who believe in me." Emily held his gaze for a second, then smiled. "That's a good reason." But the journey wasn't smooth. One evening, he attended an investor meeting, hoping to pitch his startup idea. As he stood in front of the small group, his nerves took over. He stuttered, lost track of his thoughts, and mispronounced words. The investors exchanged glances, some looking unimpressed. After the meeting, Emily found him outside, sitting on a bench, staring at the city lights. "Rough night?" she asked, sitting next to him. "I failed," he admitted, his voice heavy. "They didn't take me seriously." Emily shook her head. "You didn't fail. You learned. That's different." Li Wei sighed. "What if I'm just not good enough? What if I never get better?" Emily reached out, gently touching his hand. "You already are better. The Li Wei I met months ago wouldn't have even tried. But tonight you did." Her words lit a fire inside him. He wasn't going to give up. Not now. For the next few months, Li Wei pushed himself even harder. He practiced his pitch in front of the mirror every night. He joined an English-speaking club, forcing himself to hold conversations with strangers. He recorded his own voice, listening to his mistakes and improving them. And then one day, the opportunity came again. Another investor meeting, another chance. This time, when he stood in front of the investors, he didn't just speak. He told a story. He spoke about his small town, about his dream to build a startup that would change lives, about how he learned English just to be able to stand there that day. His words weren't perfect, but they were real. And this time, The investors listened. By the end of the meeting, one of them nodded. "I like your idea," he said. "Let's talk." Li Wei had done it. He had broken the barrier. And as he walked out of the room, Emily was waiting. "I knew you could do it," she said, grinning. Li Wei smiled back. "I had a good reason to." This wasn't just the end of his journey. It was the beginning of something bigger. Li Wei's story is proof that learning a language is about more than just words. It's about courage, purpose, and persistence. So if you're struggling to learn English, remember, every mistake is a step forward. Keep going, keep trying, and one day you'll look back and see how far you've come. Learn English through stories, and let your journey begin.